Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. I call to order the Operations Committee meeting of Tuesday, April 3rd, 2020. Welcome to those watching at home or in the audience. Our first action item is the approval of the minutes for the meeting of Tuesday, January 14. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved, Erickson.
Second.
Motioned and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Our first and only item under unfinished business is item 3A, review of draft edits to the Policies and Procedures Manual. To frame this up, I'm just going to review a few key points from the last Operations Committee meeting. The Operations Committee is tasked with the annual review of the Policies and Procedures Manual and to recommend any changes or updates to the full City Council. We did that review at our last meeting. We decided that cleanup language, meaning updating the manual to reflect current ordinance and practice, would be drafted by our staff for review and recommendation. Substantive changes to policy would be deferred to a future meeting for more in-depth discussion. A major goal of the cleanup is to get the procedures manual up to date to match current ordinance and policy so that when the new City Council is seated in May, whoever that may be, they have accurate information. Since our last meeting, staff has had that opportunity to draft the changes to our procedures manual, and they are all cleanup in nature. All of you have a copy of those proposed updates. At this time, I'm going to ask our staff, specifically our City Clerk, Tom Greco, to explain the draft language that has been written, and I'm going to let you take it away, Tom.
Okay, at the beginning of the manual, there are some minor changes, changing the date of the manual itself. Looking at our most recent versions of this, that has been updated as well. And then getting into the substantive portions, the first area that was looked at was agenda deadlines and submission of documents. All that change was simply a change to the EO, the Executive Order Reference Number. It changed from 1612 to 179 after they were renumbered in the past year. The next area is public input. It looks like a lot of changes here, but it is not. It is the changes are made to be in congruence with what is our most recent public input ordinance, and the verbiage that you see here through here has been taken from. Basically, it's been through our city attorney's office already. This is actually the verbiage that's at the end of each one of our agendas, and it explains when we take public input, when the council takes public input, and essentially what the ground rules are, meaning that input won't last more than 3 minutes per person, and in total not more than 30 minutes. However, it goes on to say essentially when an item is up for final consideration on the regular agenda, then it will be 5 minutes per person, 3 minutes otherwise. This next paragraph here addresses some components of meetings themselves. This too reflects a change that was made in state law last year, and it explains certain areas where public comment is not required by the governing body, and that's reflected in this particular portion. Looking forward, we do get more specifically into public comment. We've added joint meetings. That was an inadvertent exclusion from the past. We take it at joint meetings, and then just some cleanup language. The meeting agenda will include an item called public comment, and generally that's been placed before adjournment or before an executive session. Going on, some cleanup language here regarding the time limit. First of all, the discontinuance of segregating proponents and opponents, but we still have this provision. This has not changed. Chair reserves the right to limit the number of speakers following 1 hour testimony, but may be overridden by a majority vote of the council. It didn't specify what type of vote it took earlier. And then moving on into the next portion, we've for some time had a policy with regard to individuals bringing electronic presentations in for council meetings. As you know, this verbiage here that I'm highlighting is directly from our ordinance. So it explains when electronic media can be used during a city council meeting. And then the remainder of this are the procedures. And what we ask is that people deliver the file on a USB drive to the city clerk's office no later than 2 p.m. on the day of the meeting, but during office hours. So anytime during office hours up to 2 p.m. the day of the meeting. We've traditionally requested, and the rationale has been people bring it directly so they could see their item get downloaded onto the computer and know how to access it as the meeting progresses. We will take a look at it for viruses. And then the other point here, number 3, I went ahead and removed some words from this. It originally said the file will be rejected if it is corrupt or the content contains profanity or nudity. That's more of a content issue that I don't think my office should be getting into. However, because the ordinance does address embedded audio or video, that is something we can address within the presentation. And then finally, we will assist in accessing the file at the council meeting. There have not been any changes to this section. And then the next one is the council travel policy. Mr. Bixler will cover that.
Welcome, Dave.
Good afternoon, Dave Bixler, Budget Analyst for the City Council. Under this part of the policy, we are changing under the pre-authorized travel under general information that we're just going to be adding the organizations that the city clerk and internal audit have affiliations with. And then the other edit we have is under education, travel, and training policy. We're simply adding to add staff to the training policy.
Very good. Thank you.
And those are the changes that are reflected based on the last meeting.
Okay. With that, I'm going to open it up to committee for any questions or discussion. Any questions, comments from the committee? Seeing none, very good. It's in harmony with what we had asked for, which was to have the essentially cleanup so it was accurate without making any policy changes. So procedurally, this committee recommends changes to the full city council, and that will come forward as a resolution to adopt the new city council policies and procedures manual. So I would ask for that motion, and I would suggest a motion to recommend approval of the proposed amendments to the city council policies and procedures manual.
So moved, Erickson.
Second.
If I can, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
What's the timeline on that you're looking at? Like, are we looking next week? Are we looking, I mean, what do you think? Should we wait a solid, sorry, I didn't see that.
Probably the 17th.
Okay, that's good.
In 2
And I
weeks.
would just suggest that we just send a communication out to the full council and just say for your review, and then there's also time for people to weigh in if there's something in there, but really it's just cleanup language that really just makes it consistent with the ordinances that we've already passed. And I know we need to do this every couple of years anyways, not to have any substantive changes, but just really make sure that it's consistent with that language.
Okay, thank you. That's a great idea. Looks like we could have Jim send that out on behalf of the operations committee so everybody can review it. That's 2 weeks, and then it would come up as a resolution for adoption. So there'll be some time for input if necessary.
Thank you. I think that's great.
Okay, so we had a motion, and I believe we did get the second.
You did.
Okay, so all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. So that has been recommended for approval and will be forwarded to the full city council. Next, we have 2 items under new business. They're both informational presentations. Councilor Brecky has asked to present on both of these items to the operations committee. The first item that she would like to present to the operations committee on is called City Council Committees. And so whenever you're ready, Councilor Brecky, we would welcome your presentation. And thank you for coming.
Thank you. I have one more. The city clerk put some of my handouts in there, but I have one I forgot to have. Lay them over here for, wait a minute, which, is that the right? Which one is that? Actually, that's not. Yes, that's the one. Thank you. I'll display these here. So I wanted to talk to the council about just council organization, council structure, the use of our time, and my idea that I'd like to present to you, I believe would create an opportunity for a better use or more efficient use of the council's time in doing the council work. And so I'll start with a little history, based on research that I have done, on the council committee structure. And that history really involved a long and detailed conversation with Deborah Owen, who served as city clerk and council administrator at the time that this structure was adopted. And my conversations with her indicated that she indicated that it was something she recommended to the council. It was based largely on her background in the legislature, and later, not in the legislature, but being being involved with state government and understanding how state government worked. And her reason for encouraging it to them is because she said, I thought that it would help the council focus, by compartmentalizing their legislative responsibilities. And it was set up really in parallel to state government. We talked about it. I said, it seems to me that it's not working because of that very compartmentalization, and because we're distinguishable, from the state legislature in very many ways. And she would agree that it never really worked. It didn't really help focus. And I think what I have identified, and this is me identifying it, I think the reason why it didn't work is because when you look at just the legislature versus the council on this specific issue, the legislature is made up of, Christine, 127, how many? 105 members. So you've got 105 members, and they're trying to navigate somewhere between 300 and 600 bills as they exercise their legislative function. And we've got a city council of 8. And, when we, are charged with navigating our legislative responsibility, we deal with far less volume. So to have this immaculate, detailed committee structure for just a handful of legislative issues, maybe was more than we needed, more structure than we needed. So I gave you a couple of handouts that I'd like to look at now. One of them, Tom put together for me, that just shows the council committee work, and it shows that that it's decreased over time, that issues have been brought before the council. And the problems that it's having, I think, result from a couple things. One is it ends up being duplicative. If you bring it before the council, and I'm going to use Councilmember Neitzer's berm ordinance. He gave a lovely presentation. I sat through that, not as a member of the land use committee, but as a spectator. And then he gave the same lovely presentation to the full council. And yet the council reported, the committee, did a report, and that was the only item on the agenda. And, it was just like a 3-sentence report, and really had to hear it twice. And I remember saying to him afterwards, see, I don't get it. I think that we should just have it once, an informational, and it should be all before the full council, because there have been problems, and I've experienced them, where when you get the 2 levels of information, the committee gets the full level, and then if they don't duplicate it or repeat it, then you've got half the council really knowing what's going on, and the other half not so much. So I think it's caused that duplicative issue, and it's also caused, kind of a repetitive issue, because if you, again, in Greg's scenario that I would use, you really gave the full thing twice, and so, again, just not the most efficient use of our time. And I think we could use that time a little more efficiently. So, again, the point of this presentation here is just to show really over time, and I really want to focus on not the total, but really what's happened over time, and you'll see a decrease in the use of the committee structure. And I would like to believe that that's in part because I think this administration is making a very strong effort to fill the whole council with information. And I think that perhaps, at least at some level, they may share my concern that this 2 levels of information, is not good. Having, members of committees knowing, and that they've sort of abandoned the committee use in favor of the informational meetings. And so I'm asking to look mostly at years 2018 and 2019. And again, to date, we have nothing in 2020. And so it also results in the clerk's office scheduling all these meetings and then canceling all these meetings and all the notice, that goes with that. And I think it sends kind of an, it doesn't really send, I think, a good message to the public, because it doesn't look like we're doing anything when we're having, all these meetings scheduled. And if anybody was looking at it and then, then canceling them all the time. And again, just, tying it back to the volume, that involves a second handout that I gave you. And that handout, or did I give it to you yet? No. We've got 2 presentations, and it's all about council procedure, and I've got them. Okay, that's this one. Yeah. And what this one was, is I just, and this was very last minute, or I'd had both years, but I had us take a look at, how we use our legislative function. And again, just to demonstrate the lack of volume. I mean, actually, council-generated ordinances, which would be the exercise of our legislative function, are not that many. That's just 1 year. And when I asked Tom to research it, I said, and I'm just going to trigger on your memories as well. I mean, it's around 12 or so a year. And if you separate that function between legislative policy making and legislative problem solving, and depending on how you define that, I looked at this, and there's 2 that are about arguable to me, but I saw mostly, I would say they're almost all legislative problem solving. And that doesn't necessarily lend themselves to the categorization of committees, land use, da-da-da-da. And I think, again, it would, it would better serve us to just kind of take a fresh look at this and think that there might be a better way to use our time because of the way that our function actually operates. I think most of the ordinances we bring forward are to legislatively solve problems. Occasionally, we're going to get into that bigger policy those policy setting issues, bring forth a scheme of ordinances. But for the most part, the city has set policy by ordinances unless there's really new issues or big, broad categories that need to be addressed, like something like 5G and how you're going to implement it. We don't have a lot of legislative policy making. We're really more engaged in legislative problem solving, which, again, I don't think lends itself to the committee structure we have in place. So again, I had Tom put that together last minute, but I think it kind of demonstrates kind of what my memory is, and I think your memory would be similar to mine. So what is my suggestion? My suggestion is that we consider, eliminating the council structure, and we don't have to do it permanently. I'm suggesting a trial period. All we have to do is just stop scheduling the meetings for 6 months to a year, and, think of a better way of how we might use that time. And my suggestion is that we eliminate the mayor's directors meetings, and that would be the meetings that we have on Friday that are attended by the chair and the vice chair every week. And then there's a rotation of council members that get to attend on rotation. And again, my calculation was it ends up happening about 6 times a year that, I get to go. And then for me, I think 3 of them, you just inadvertently, not through no fault of me, they got canceled for various reasons. So I think this year I've only attended 3. And again, this is where the council's agenda for our Tuesday meetings is reviewed with the directors and the mayor. And, considering the acknowledgement that the chair and vice chair are really mostly fundamentally administrative, Again, I think we get to that two-tiered level of information again. We've got a couple of council members that have more information than the rest of the council, and if it's our council agenda for our council briefing, I think we should consider a different format for that. And what I'm suggesting is that we could utilize the time that's freed up in the, if we cancel these committee meetings, we could use that time and have a council briefing, just extend the informational meeting. You know, keep the information meeting pretty much it is, and just at some point we just switch it to, it would be a notice meeting, a council briefing meeting. And my suggestion is that we not necessarily go through all of the agenda items, but my suggestion would be that Jim David would continue to generate red notes using both the, he's using the Planning Commission notes, and then I've been in conversations with Clerk Greco about having a more detailed agenda review form where we would put a little more information on the item, you know, ask more from the staff to make a more detailed explanation of the item in the agenda review form. From those two things, the red notes could still be generated and sent out like on a Friday afternoon. And then the issues that we would put in place of that in the council briefing would be what I would call the weighty issues. Those issues that really need a little more attention and discussion. How do you determine what the weighty issues are? I think it would be a combination of council kind of identifying them, you know, the administration identifying them, and kind of similar like how we do the consent, council members pulling off and identifying them as well after they get the red notes, you know, and that, and so it would be what I would see as a combination of weighty issues and emerging issues that we would discuss in that, you know, that extra hour. And that would give, again, the mayor and his staff to bring something, you know, kind of additional, you know, kind of like the informational meeting, you know, if he's got something out there that he knows is going to be coming down fairly soon. So they get two bites of the apple with this informational meeting and, you know, again, the emerging issues portion. But the weighty issues items, again, I'm here because I'm presenting, but I'm also here because I'm a council member, and I would like to have some discussion with this committee. Since I'm not on it, it's the only way I can do this. But I think that's open for how, you know, how those would be determined. And then the final piece of research, you know, that I have for you, and you know, you're familiar with how I operate now. That's usually something I try to do is just check other cities. And sometimes when you do this, you'll often find what I call best practices. And sometimes you'll just find a myriad of ideas. And I would say in this one, I never found anything, any trend or pattern. It was more individualized. And I think that that becomes an individual issue with councils. It doesn't surprise me that it's more individualized because it's something that can change from time to time based on people's schedules, you know, based on who you have on the council. Some people have more flexibility in their schedule. Scheduling becomes huge with meetings. I get that. And so I think it doesn't surprise me that it's individualized. So that's what I would present it as. I mean, you can look at it. I've done my homework. I've looked at the cities. It's kind of all over the board. You'll see a little bit of everything. What I'm suggesting is sort of a hybrid. I took some of those ideas. I certainly learned from it. You know, there's a lot of councils that don't even have agenda briefings. Again, I always tend to give more weight to the cities that are closer to our size than the smaller cities, and so I try to put it in that order. I put the larger cities, the more comparable ones in front and the other ones in the back. But in this issue, I think it's coming up again with the best utilization of your time. I'm trying to make sure that you have the information you need, you know, to make good, informed decisions. And I would add, for me, I think doing it this way would allow the media and the public to become involved earlier as well by not having these director briefings on Friday, having the red notes come out. And the red notes, you know, are not confidential. They could be shared with the public, so things could be public at that time. The media, the press, the public could attend these additional informational meetings, and you know, just a little more opportunity for everybody to be more knowledgeable as those issues move through our process. So that's really all I have for you. That's my suggestion. Again, I'm looking for a discussion on it, and if that needs to be scheduled for a different time, if we have to discuss time, we can do that now, that's fine. I don't know if you want me to go straight to my other presentation, but at this moment, at least I'll take questions. Let's just start with that.
I'd like to open it up for questions for Councilor Brecky. We'll go to Councilor Selberg first.
Okay. Well, Councilor Brecky, I always appreciate that you come to these, and you always take time to be about everything, and you have a lot of ideas, and I think you and I have gone around on a few of them. I think a couple things that you're talking about here have maybe some merit. The one that I think you and I don't think ever quite get on the same wavelength is on the leadership or the directors meeting deal. I've just never, outside of your conversation, and I appreciate what you say, I've been involved with these now for about 2.5 years, where I've been there every Friday. I would say it's gotten better with attendance for the third member, but it's still been pretty weak. I have yet to have anybody come up to me on a Tuesday and go, boy, I don't know who took the notes on Friday, but I completely didn't get that point, or I missed all this or that. It's one of these things where there's a lot of things again here that you presented that I will take under consideration. The directors meeting part, I still just am not quite getting what's missing. I've not heard a word from anybody else or anything to that effect, where it's just not doing the job it's supposed to, and this is after I've been here now, getting towards the end of my run. So everything has room for improvement? Sure. Does this? I guess maybe. Do we need to take it all apart and start from scratch or do whatever? I don't see that part. But as far as conversation, I'm sure we'll have more. We've had about 10 or 15 or 20 on this, and we'll do it again. But my main point is thank you for being here. I appreciate how engaged you are in coming to these things and throwing out different ways to do things.
And can I ask you a question? Because,
No.
yes, I think I should be able to ask you a
Yes.
question. No, because I do want to have the discussion. And again, I say this gently, not in a kind of accusatory fashion, but how long have you been going to the meetings? Because my understanding that before you were council chair, you went for the meetings for about 1.5 years in anticipation of becoming
No, not that
in
long.
leadership.
Probably a few months before. Basically, it was one of those where I think you've seen this the last year or two also. Well, people, if they've basically expressed some interest or people have approached them on possibly being in leadership, how it was brought to me was, why don't you start attending meetings? And there were a couple counselors who were on their way out at the time and went, why don't you sit in when I'm supposed to be there, learn, see if it's for you. So I would say if the question's timetable, I suppose it was 3-4 months where I was pretty regularly kind of getting the.
But my point is, so you've been going to them for almost 2.5 years. And I would just ask you to consider that. I mean, you've been in that luxury position of having those meetings. And I've said repeatedly, this is where you and I disagree, that I've felt the most briefed when I go to them. And now, I have said I'm not going to go to them because my understanding of our process is I'm supposed to, send someone who I think should be a good leader, in lieu of me. So I have to sacrifice my attendance at the meetings in order to encourage, someone that I support in a leadership position for the future. And I guess I would just hearken back to, it's our briefing. It's how we need to be briefed as a council on the issues that I tend to focus on. And so why did that ever become, a mayor's directors meeting and out of the purview of the full council?
I'm not sure how it originated. I can just tell you that in my experiences, again, what I've shared with you, it seems to have worked. I have not had any complaints. I haven't had people say they have missed out on stuff. And in fact, I've had people, it's been hard to get them to come in that third seat. So again, I won't go back and forth.
Yeah.
I appreciate the conversation. I'm sure we'll have more.
And I don't want to, overstep my bounds,
No.
in that regard as well.
Thank you for the presentation.
Councilor Erickson?
I got a handful, but I don't know where. I'll start and stop wherever you
Sure,
want.
you
I'll
just
start with the
take it
committees
away.
if you're okay, and you stop me if anybody wants to kind of interject in any of my background. I've been here the longest. I've been in the legislature, so I guess I have a little bit of different view on the committees with it. I think they do work at times. I think that it's dependent upon the chair. I think that the good thing about the committees is that they're open to the public, they're open for public input, and they're recorded. And so that information is for all to see, and it's not like you can't be a part of it, you know what I mean? Or Marshall can't be a part of it, or Greg, or me, or whomever. And so they've worked in the past, and oftentimes the reason why things came to the committees were because they weren't ready for prime time. So it was an idea that needed to be worked and massaged and talked about of like, hey, what do you think? Where are we at? They've also been used for kind of a quasi task force type thing where we've had items that needed to be studied more. And so it was done in that fashion to have it as a task force. And I do agree that they're not being used. They're not being used to its potential. I'm not opposed to them going away because it's just one more thing that has to be canceled every week. But I think that it would be nice to have some sort of placeholder that maybe isn't necessarily an every week scheduled thing, but those committees exist so that when that chair wants to create, say, said task force or something to study, I'll say, our annexation. That's a great example for land use. Public services is one that is kind of a catch-all, and it's always been up to the discretion of the chair to choose where those items want to go or not go. I had an item that I brought to public services because I chaired it, and I wanted to be in charge of it. So I brought it to public services, and it was clearly a land use item, but it was the only way that I could get to where I needed it to be. And at that time, it was strictly informational, but nothing was moving forward. Nothing was coming forward on an agenda. And generally with the informational, a lot of times those are items that are coming forward later. But I do see they're not used to its ability. That changing that needs to be done, I would say. But like I said, maybe it's a task force holder, something, I don't know. But that's something that we can think through as far as what that looks like.
Can I just toss out a thought, just interested in your thought on it? You know, just what about, again, because we have the flexibility to just, you know, do a trial run with things. Because what about if we didn't regularly schedule the committees, but schedule them on the as needed basis, again, utilizing that time, and then on the as needed basis, that becomes a special meeting, but it just comes a random meeting as necessary. Then you wouldn't have to dismantle the structure, for the things that you talked about, but you could again more efficiently utilize that time that is scheduled, and just have those be, just as scheduled as needed. Another way to do that is through ad hoc committees. You can just, at your open discussion, you say, hey, I'm working on such, is there 3 council members who are interested in the same item? You have an ad hoc committee, and then again, you notice the meetings, and you just do it as the issues come
And
up.
anyone can do that. What I think I like about an actual structure and policy is so that we're all on the same page, and that we're just not flying around stuff every single day just for the sake of doing something. I think it needs to be well thought out, like the annexation. That was phenomenal. And it was very important to Councilor Kiley and those on that committee to make sure, 1, it was recorded, and 2, there's public input. It was such a collaborative task force, and really the poster child of how things should be done for those task force. And it was done in a way that I don't know if, I don't think that we're anywhere near making a decision on that, but that's something that just needs to be spitballed around a little bit to find out what's the best way to do it for those committees. But we aren't using them. It's probably time to make a change for those and move them on. I think the intention originally was good, and it was just an area for us to have things come for prime time. Those committees are extremely different than the legislature, and the legislature has to pass out a committee to get to the House floor or the Senate floor, and 2 chambers, 2 committees. It has 4 hearings. So the structure is just way different that I just don't think that it makes.
Well, again, they're dealing with, 600 pieces, so they've got to have some mechanism for sieving or screening things through to get through it all. I like your example of the task force, because to me, that was an example of using it for legislative policy. And the system does tend to work for that. So, maybe it's just as simple as leaving it in place, but, making those be, just like the operations committee. It doesn't have a set meeting time. You just set a meeting, you noticed it, and you had it. Maybe we roll it into that, experiment with it that way, and then again try to make better use of that regular routine.
And I think the one thing that we all need to be very, very mindful on is making sure that we realize that we're not all retired, and that this has to really be important to take in the working people into mind with this, because not everybody can be on a task force at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. I mean, we have all the luxury of flexible jobs that we're here and able to do this today, but not everyone does. And so I really want to make sure that this city council is representative of the people of Sioux Falls and not just of retired or whatever, that we just are very,
You don't
very
want
mindful of
us
that.
all to be retired curmudgeons like me?
No, that's not what I'm saying. We always, I mean, I think that it's important that we have an age range of all kinds that looks at what is going on in our community, but it's important.
Well,
to
I
know.
certainly heard your feelings on that strongly when I kind of came up with this idea, because I was, there's this Friday meeting, again, that could just go away. And that's elimination of a meeting, better utilization of this. So I'm very cognizant of what all of you do and that balance that, I understand that balance, and I share with you, I want, I want to be cognizant of barriers to entry. I don't want to limit people in any way, but there's also a point where you make that commitment. There has to be some, sort of minimum commitment that we're all willing to make, before we.
Yeah, if you would have told me I had to do Board of Equalization when I first started, I don't know that any of us realized that week I'd be taking a week vacation for Board of Equalization. The other thing that I want to be mindful of too, I'll continue. I think that removing the committees is fine. I think adding another briefing to the end, I think is going to be nearly impossible. If you notice our times between informational committee and our start time, we barely have, a hot 10 minutes to huff down a sandwich and go to the bathroom and grab a bottle of water before we start that. And then that's if we don't have an executive session. If we have an executive session, our timeline is so tight the way it is right now, that adding in another briefing, I think, is going to be difficult. The other thing is I don't think that we should commit to adding another briefing without the administration being lock and step and it being a collaborative thing between the two of us, because there's so many changes and things that take place with that. And to be honest, the Friday meeting is not the council's meeting. It's the mayor's meeting. We're at the pleasure of the mayor.
That's my point. I agree.
He can say, Janet Brecky, you're not allowed to come. He can say, Christine Erickson, you're not allowed to come. Or, you know what, City Council, I don't want your staff to come. Would this mayor do that? Absolutely not. But my point is it is his right to call a meeting anytime he wants, and he can choose to invite anyone he wants as well. And these were started many, many years ago. It had always just been 2 city councilors that went. It was chair and vice chair. After some time, the operations committee, actually under my direction, came up with a rotation process so everyone would be afforded the opportunity to go, because not everyone did have that. I started attending a little bit earlier when I became in the vice chair role, because I went to Erpenbach and Ralphing and said, hey, are you guys planning to go? And so I took their spots. And so oftentimes there's not a third person at there, and even the mayors, not even there as often. If you will see, in my opinion, these directors meetings really have changed a lot over the last 2 years. Previously, I would say you had to bring chairs in because every single director was there. Our internal audit manager would go oftentimes. I mean, it would be, if Chief Burns wasn't there, his number 2 was there. If the librarian wasn't there, boy, she was sending somebody in her place, and every single person, I mean, it was packed around the table. That was under the Huether administration. It's changed now to, and not under, I haven't been told why it's been changed or anything. I certainly respect the decisions that they make on their own. It's changed to where if you have an item on the agenda, you're there. In my mind, that's what it appears to me. Because the mayor's not there a lot of the times too. He's got other stuff going on and other commitments. So Chief of Staff Beck might be there running it, or Finance Director Pritchard might be there. And so it's really changed a lot in that fact, that when it is my week, I don't see necessarily the value that I can't get by doing my own research and homework, by reading my red notes, by doing my studies, by reaching out to any questions I might have that are coming forward. I think that's what we're supposed to do as counselors, is read and do all of that comes along with it. The other concern I have is define weighty. I mean, weighty to you and weighty to me might be.
I mean, yeah, I like that term. I found that term in my research, you know, because there's hot button issues, but weighty was a term that, you know, basically, I think we can agree that, you know, again, just on our own reflection, 2 or 3 issues, you know, a meeting is a significant meeting. I mean, we'll have 2 or 3 issues, you know, pretty much each meeting there's 2 or 3 things or 1 or 2 things that we're all gonna kind of drilling down on. I think there's ways to figure out what those are before. I think with a combination effort between the council and the administration, collaborating, but yeah, we're gonna miss some. And then there's gonna always be, we're always gonna be, why didn't we have any information on this? Why didn't we know more about that? And I think oftentimes the administration has their catcher's mitt on. What are they going to want more information about that we think we're getting them? So, you know, that's why I suggested the idea of, you know, again, the administration, you know, after the red notes would come out, you know, a combination of the administration making suggestions and council being able to pull something and put it into the discussion. Is one way, but there would be there would need to be
My question
discussion
back to you
about that.
then would be is what information are you today not getting that you need to have? Because that agenda comes out on Thursday and you have the ability, yes, it's through the weekend, but you have all of Friday, you have all of Monday and all of Tuesday to get whatever information that you need that's on the agenda. And then the other thing that I would say are those meatier, weighty items generally have 1 or 2 informational meetings. So the Sioux TIF, the railroad redevelopment, I mean, you name it. And nothing requires, like if you want to bring an ordinance forward, nothing requires you to do an informational or me to do an informational. Oftentimes we do it. Same thing with the administration. But those weighty items, I guess, that you would define, those do come in front of us, like the special events ordinance. I mean, you saw how emotional that item got and just kind of blew up, so to speak, that we had to have kind of draw back and have several other conversations. I would say the same thing happened with the smoking ordinance years ago, that came forward, and that was the same thing where we said, whoa, you know, let's pump the brakes and let's pull this back and have a.
And that's another thing that could happen at this agenda briefing issue. If all of a sudden it blows up, it's just, whoa, we're going to move, you know, to defer it because it needs more information.
And we do that today. We do that today. We defer something.
If I could answer the question, I'll go back and answer the question. Let me start with, okay, the history again. It started under Mayor Munson's term. The briefing meeting started, and again, it started with a combination of leadership, and then eventually council members were added. And then under Mayor Huether's administration, there was an after meeting for the leadership, and the council members, representatives were excluded. This mayor changed that. Circling back to your...
There's always been notes. When I was in leadership and we did have a leadership meeting, we used to have an attorney's meeting, and the attorney would meet with leadership and the third counselor that would be there. Attorney Fifley would send out his attorney-client notes of things that were coming forward. That was our attorney-client briefing on potential lawsuits, potential big issue items that maybe his office received. And so we would get a lengthy email, well, not always lengthy, but we'd get a good attorney-client email from him. And so 8:30 leadership would go meet with them. This email would then be sent to everyone on the council as attorney-client, and then you'd go into the agenda briefing, and then you'd go into a leadership meeting. Sometimes others were invited in, sometimes not, but there was always notes sent. And so those notes were really just, here's what we talked about, here's what the mayor's working on, here's where he's going. He's got people coming in from our sister city, the parade's coming up. I mean, all those kind of things were, now this mayor does it differently where he sends our mayor's notes to us. And so each mayor can choose how to do it, how they want. But my question to you is, what information are you not getting that you feel like this would afford you to, that you're currently not getting on your own?
I'd circle back to, you know, where I began the discussion, a better utilization of our time. and not having a fear to change things, based upon the changes in administrations, the changes in the makeup of the council, looking at that research and going, everybody does it a little different. A lot of them don't have any agenda briefing meetings. They just don't have them. And they just, deal with what comes forward when it comes forward. You'll see that in the research. So if you look at it from a utilization of the time, and you look at it how things have changed, I just pointed out, it's changed from Munson, you said it changed again under Huther. What I'm saying is, it's not necessarily about what information I'm not getting. It's, if you're concerned about meetings, why are we having this meeting that nobody's attending and that nobody is apparently getting anything from? You said we need to work with the administration on this. I totally agree.
That's the mayor's meeting. It's not my meeting. It's the mayor's meeting. So if he chooses to do that with his directors.
And that's the point that I made initially. Why are we having that be our briefing meeting? Do we need one or don't we need one? Let's talk about what we need. And again, the best utilization of our time is it to go to a meeting that's not attended by the full council, because it can't be. That it's only attended by a couple people, and the other people are seeing less and less value, and it's not being utilized in the way that it has been utilized by by previous administrations. Is there a better way to utilize our time as city councils? You're the one that's really concerned about meeting times, and I've tried to be very cognizant of that, because you've been very vocal about it.
How are you going to fit that in on a Tuesday night?
I think you can fit it in on a Tuesday night, because again, there's only 2 or 3 issues, and if it blows up, you just defer it till the next week, because there ends up being too much going on.
Because the other thing
I think there's going to be 2 or 3 weighty issues, and the rest can be handled by red notes.
You have to have public input also at those briefings, because you have to. It's a public meeting, so you have to have public input. So you have to have an extra 15 minutes, which an extra 15 minutes on the informational. There's 30 minutes. Plus, Tony needs 15 minutes, so there's 45 minutes. If we have an executive session, there's no way that you're going to fit all of that in. I would like to see an actual written proposal of exactly how you would see it. I know we're just kind of talking about it.
We're having the discussion.
Right, and I appreciate that, and you always do plenty of research to back that, but I need to see a written plan so that there can be substantive changes and how it would look. I also want to know.
Well, if that's going to happen, then I need a committee who's willing to work with me on it, because this idea that I'm going to do all this work so you guys can just bat it down and bat it down. Do you want to work on it? Do you agree that there's a better way we could utilize our time? Can we start there? If there's agreement to that, then yeah, I'm more than happy to work on it. But I would also add, again, if you look at it from a utilization of time, and you look at it, you're asking me what information I'm not getting. Well, it's not just about me. I figured out that there's 2 or 3 weighty issues. And when I go to the briefings, I found out all this other extra stuff that gets talked about at the meetings. It's just kind of good to know. I also get 2 or 3 questions answered by the directors. I also have 5 minutes with the mayor or so. So yeah, I'm going to go to mine, except when I have to give them away. I'm going to go. But is there a better way to do it? Do I need it? No, I can do the same thing you can do.
Right.
But the question is, then what is the purpose of this meeting? And I have talked to the mayor's office. I think he's got a question mark. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I've talked about it. I've talked about the value of it. I think he's got a question mark himself as to the value of it at this point. But that, I don't, again, want to put words in his mouth. But I definitely agree that's something we talk about together. Is there a better way to utilize our time? And then the other thing that I think is really important, and again, not about what I'm not getting. It's more about when this happens on Friday. I mean, this is the point when it becomes public. And what is the public getting? I mean, what are we publicly putting out there? That lets the public know these issues are coming down, that lets the media know, why don't we extend that? Again, why don't we make those red notes public? Why don't we, let the media know that we'll be discussing, some of those bigger issues and have them there? I think there's some huge benefits to extending that time frame. So I think there are definitely benefits to it.
So are you
and I
wanting
do
to
think
start
there
the
are
informational at
benefits
3
to
o'clock
attending the
then?
meetings, and I'm going to attend them when I can, as long as I can. But
Doing a meeting or not? Do you want to extend the meeting to 3 o'clock, then start the meeting at 3 to make sure that that time is afforded?
Ask me again?
On Tuesday, are you wanting to start the informational meeting at 3 o'clock? I don't know the last time we've had an informational meeting where we have not eaten dinner here tonight, which I could care less if I eat dinner here or not. But I'm saying is we go straight up to the time. So my question is are you willing to start at 3 o'clock to be able to afford the time for these briefings? And have you talked to the attorney, the mayor, and the directors in regards to the timeline of when the agenda items are released and the changes and all of, I mean, there's so much to the procedure and policies of getting something on the agenda, the notification to the public, the notification to the neighborhoods, the signs that go out, the informational meetings. I mean, it's not just an agenda. The fact when somebody says, I just heard about this, well, you're driving by the sign and you're not paying attention then, or you live across the street from an empty lot and all of a sudden there's some new signs there, things are changing. So there's always, there's a lot of information, but I can't make somebody be engaged with the public as well. And so oftentimes, like I said, the mayor's office, they will have those weighty items come in front of us, the pavilion, the budget, the forecast, all of those things that those then later are on the agenda. Some aren't, but some are. I think the real area where you'll see support is restructuring those committees and making some changes with that. I'm hesitant to add another briefing in a meeting without knowing exactly the sentiment of everyone with it. I think we have to be cognizant.
So am I, which is why I'm here. Why,
I
I'm
think
not
that we
on a
have to be
venture on my own.
cognizant of the people that are working versus non-working. I think that we have to have a written plan. I think that's kind of how the sausage is made with that.
And I guess I would respond, obviously I'm the most flexible. I have a flexible schedule. So I'm, again, with this council, the uniqueness of this council, the makeup of this council, taking all those things into consideration, I just think, if we worked together and we decided we wanted to do this, I would easily defer, to the majority of the council as to what, is going to work with this particular makeup of this council at this time. But I do think that, you couldn't have made my point better for for questioning the effectiveness of these directors' meetings from both the administration standpoint and from the council standpoint.
It's not my meeting, though. That's my point. The mayor has a lot of meetings that I may or may not attend, or he may attend and go, what did I just sit through? Because he maybe didn't find any meaning in the meeting that I just called. That's just the way it works.
So then, I roll back to the question, what does this council need to feel prepared, adequately prepared for the council and to bring the members of the public and the media along with us? What do we need to be doing that satisfies our needs as a council, and being cognizant that we are this public segment of this body. And so we always need to be cognizant that we're bringing them along with us,
Absolutely, and I think that we've really all strived to do that in different ways. I think that where you're going to see the low-hanging fruit is to restructure those committees and focus on that first. See what you can get changed with that first and foremost, and then take the next steps if that's what you see. That's my personal opinion. Everyone on the committee can weigh in how they see differently.
Is there any other questions before, or comments before maybe I have a few? Seeing none, I think the first part is identifying that there's a problem, and I totally agree with you, there's a problem. We cancel these meetings weekly. I don't think the committee structure as structured works right now. And I think the question then is, what do you do about it? And I've thought about maybe having, and I don't know what the answer is, having a standing time where there's just one time a month that's just a generic placeholder that we can pencil something in if some emerging issue, as you talk about, comes up, or potentially, sometimes a committee can be used. Sometimes we've done things in reverse where we've brought things to committee and then we've gone to the informational, and then essentially, like I said, I'm just repeating myself twice, and it feels a little wasteful. And maybe sometimes it'd be better to go to the informational, and then if it's something where people say, hey, this is really complicated, I don't think this is quite ready, you could kick it to a committee. That's another idea. But I think you're right, something should happen with committees. I'm just not sure exactly what, so we agree on that. But I'd like to dig into your agenda briefing thoughts and ideas. So, and I think, and I get your point, there's the meeting that the mayor's calling, and then there's a question of, do we want as a council to say, we want you to do X, and this is gonna be this is what we're asking you to come to and present to us. And so I think there's merit there. The question would be how, and I do want to fill in a few blanks, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. I want to be careful, but this mayor has stopped doing those quote-unquote leadership meetings because it had that aura of secrecy, whether it was fair or not. And in lieu of that, he now gets a report from all of his directors. He picks out the most interesting items, and he sends that in one email over the weekend, versus telling that to leadership, have them write the notes, and then send an email out, and something could be lost in translation or put them in a bad position. So there's that. As far as the agenda review meetings, sometimes people used to call them directors' meetings, and they certainly aren't a director's meeting anymore, because now you literally have 4 or 5 people there. And again, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that the reason he did that was he felt that as a manager, essentially, that having all of his directors sitting there for 30 minutes, even if they didn't have an agenda item, wasn't a great use of their time, that they're all being paid essentially to kind of come and go through the motions.
That was his reasoning, yes.
Yeah, so that was his choice, and I don't know what he'll do in the future as far as agenda review meetings. I've actually found that, I'll just be completely blunt, the value of them has kind of continued to sort of dwindle because there's so few people there. But so, I mean, I think there is some merit in how we do the agenda review and how that could change. I think the issue, again, and it's not unsolvable, is timing. How do you fit it in? And as you stated, every counselor is going to be different. I mean, you may pick, if we just say that we have to pick 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, that might work for one council, but 2 years later, somebody else comes in and they say that, well, they work at 4 o'clock on Tuesday. So, yeah, I mean, we have to be somewhat flexible. So, yeah, I don't know if you have any comments on any of that, but yeah,
another alternative is to just tell the mayor we really don't need the directors' meetings anymore. Just ask him if he's okay with that. We don't need them. Abandon them altogether. Do what some of these other councils have. They don't have an agenda briefing. Instead, maybe you still have, again, a set of red notes generated by Jim David because he's told me he could use the planning commission meetings, and if we develop a agenda approval form that has more information in the description that would help us identify enough information, we could set that up in such a way we could identify the weighty issues, then, we don't have a briefing meeting. We're briefed, but that those red notes become public. Those become public on Friday. So the media is brought along. If anything needs more discussion, we try to get it set as part of the informational meeting. I mean, there's more ways to do this. And again, I'm cognizant of the timing issue that very important to all of you, least important to me because I do have the time. But I want to be, very understanding about that, because certainly there were times in my life when I certainly wouldn't have, and I would not have been able to, I think, undertake the responsibilities in the way that you guys do. I admire you all for it. It would have been very difficult. I can't imagine it, really. But, I guess the question for me is you guys keep giving me direction about what I need to do. I'm bringing it to the Operations Committee because I think it's a task for the Operations Committee. I want to be a part of it, but I'm not on the Operations Committee. I'd like to, be a part of the discussion, the dialogue, but if nobody's willing to work with me on it, again, I don't, to bring things up and get it batted down. I mean, the question is, do you agree that there's maybe some room for improvement? I'd be glad to work it and I'd be glad to lead, but I want to engage the council so that, I don't come before an informational meeting and I present something that has no support, So that's my purpose. I'm trying to pretend I'm at the table with you, although in this situation I'm not.
Well, and I don't think the reason I asked you to be here is because I wanted to have the discussion, so I don't think there's any idea to bat anything down. But I think another low-hanging fruit, and I think you identified it, that there's could be some agreement on, and I think I'd want to hear from the administration would be potentially, as you discussed, and I think I've talked with Tom about this too, is what you had described, which was maybe there's more meat to every time an agenda item is put on by the administration, they give some sort of there's a paragraph that essentially kind of goes into it, and maybe there's something that could be for public consumption, that we could come up with the red notes. I mean, if there's something that's attorney-client, then send a separate email, or whatever. But there could be some, I don't know that, I think it's a very laudable goal potentially to have something that has, because you do have potentially on a Friday, the agenda comes out and there may be something attached to it, and it's pretty arcane in the general public. It's very difficult for them to know, well, what is this thing? And if there was a paragraph that just said this is this, and it answers a lot of questions, and I don't know that that should be that difficult for the administration. And if they know it's an expectation, and then they would just do it. And there
I've
could
had
be
lengthy
some-
conversations with Tom
Okay.
and with Jim David, and absolutely, it can be done internally. The stuff exists. It's a cut and paste job.
Yeah.
And absolutely, I've been wondering, since I came on, why that copies of the red notes aren't out there. And the answer I've gotten really that was most persuasive to me was from Tom. He said, because they weren't designed for that. But if we design them for that, it should be fine. And yes, they'll be reviewed first, so that anything redacted is, anything that has a legal issue is redacted. But they're not attorney-client privileged. I mean, and they're not, and they wouldn't intend to be. And there's no reason, why they ever would be, because that stuff can be taken out of there. So it absolutely can be done. And, if that's the direction that the council's interested in going, but I like the idea that something becomes public on that Friday. And, I think we can fit in that extra discussion that needs to be had on those 2 or 3 things that, start to develop during the week that we know are going to be the ones. I think if we put our minds together, we could come out of a way to address that, even if it meant bumping some items from the informational on occasion or something, so that we could find the time. If I was given the restriction, you have to do it without changing the time, I'd figure out a way to do it without changing the amount of time. If you said, okay, we'll give you 1 more hour, I'd take that 1 more hour and I'd make it work. I mean, I just need to know what are the parameters that my fellow council members might accept.
Well, and I'm just thinking out loud, depending on how stuff is brought forward by the administration, what we expect, maybe an agenda briefing meeting doesn't really even become necessary if the notes are good enough. Except for, because if it's meaty, they need to be bringing it to an informational, because it's going to get deferred. We've had this happen many times where it's just, we can't make a decision on this. We just heard about this 2 days ago, and it's a big item, but.
And again, I think that works fine as long as you've brought the media along with you. You know what I mean? They got it on Friday, things start to blow up, we need more information, boom, we're going to defer it, get more information, slows everything down. I think everybody appreciates that. The media, the public, all appreciate that. Slow her down, take the time.
Have you talked to and we have just a little bit of time left before I'd have to check before we're going to have to do a reset, and we could I guess we're going to have to kick your item to another meeting, but the next item. But have you talked to the administration about their thoughts? Especially if it was understood that we need essentially a paragraph written, and it will be for public consumption, so write it in that, frame it that way, that, if there's any challenges to that. I wouldn't think so if they're aware of it, that they need to have it in by Thursday night or something.
I would have to defer to Tom. We've been digging into it, but I haven't had conversations about that specifically. I've had conversations about, just almost all the other things we've talked to him about. But I don't think I've actually asked them, about.
I would say it would be up to the council, and the council, right now, the agenda approval process is governed by, the process itself is governed by an executive order, and the requirement for some types of approval when it comes to placing something, how an item is placed on is actually in ordinance, and I think it, obviously there would need to be more discussion, but I think it would be an action by the council.
We would just simply add an ordinance with some new requirement.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be an ordinance or a resolution, but.
Well, okay, either way, there'd be some sort of official statement of the council setting an expectation to the administration.
And without, again, not wanting to put words in the mayor's mouth, because I've had numerous discussions with him over time, and I would say the issues, the priority issues for him are, they've shifted a little bit from time to time, but it's his own time. He's concerned about additional time, like whenever I was suggesting anything, and like adding a meeting, it was like, that means another meeting. Is the expectation that he be there? Him and his chief of staff actually his chief of staff more than him, are very cognizant about how much time he's going to dedicate to us, but whether or not it was led by his chief of staff or him, who knows? That's an issue. The value of the meeting, I think he's doing things a different way. I think that he's shifted a little bit in his opinion on that. I think he would be interested in the dialogue at this point. Again, don't want to overstep my bounds, but yes, I have been in discussion with him. And I would say this, when I presented him with this information, he was the other cities' information, he was very appreciative, thought it was very interesting. I guess both of us acknowledging that there's as many ways you can do this as you can think to do it. And again, I would kind of circle back to, it's okay to change it. I don't think this is one of those things you don't need to be married to. It's not a best practice issue. It's what the sitting council, what the sitting mayor needs to, effectively inform the public and the citizenship and feel informed as they're doing the public's business in public. I mean, if you just set that as your goal, there's any number of ways you can do it.
Okay, I think I'm running short on time, but I think the two low-hanging fruits, again, to repeat, is probably the committee structure, and I'll say red notes, and I just use that because that's what we call it today, but basically, is there a better way that we could bring a summary forward for not just us, but for the general public? I think that's something I've thought about as well. I think it'd be a wonderful transparency item. Because I do have, and I'll just maybe finish by, I do have the media call me reasonably frequently, and they'll just say, what is this agenda item? And I'll just walk them through it, So, and it prepares them to know whether, because they're trying to figure out if they should show up on Tuesday and try to start to do some research ahead of time. And sometimes they're, if you're not in the midst of it, you maybe don't understand some of the verbiage and what some of the arcane things are. And it's hard to separate what's going to be really interesting to the public versus what's very routine, so.
And I would just add my own experience, in sitting out as a candidate for several months before the meeting, as an attorney and a former city attorney, reading those agendas told me nothing. And I can't even understand them, the headers, as an attorney. I mean, I can if I just really dig into what it, like the rezoning stuff. But when I got on the council and got those red notes, it was like, whoa, this is so much easier. I can just quickly glance through the red notes, and I get it. I know what's understanding. It's in layman's terms. And so it's something to me that I thought we should have been handing out to the public forever, but did understand, Tom's take on that when I was talking to him about it. And actually got the city attorney's office to remove the attorney-client privilege stamp because they agreed with me it's not. So, I've kind of exposed our conversations, but Tom has been working on this and he's been talking to me, and we hadn't set today as the time to really talk about that. So I kind of brought it out there, but I would like to continue to work with him on that. Are any of you interested in working with me and him on that together?
Yeah, I may be potentially. I think we should discuss it and maybe see if there's other counselors that are interested. I don't even know that it has to be restricted to this group, so.
Oh, I know. But it would be nice to have.
Maybe half, 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
Potentially, so. Okay.
Because my intent would be to work with that and then can bring it back to this group, ultimately hoping for some recommendation from the operations committee,
Sure,
council.
because that is the purpose of this committee. So, okay, well, thank you. That's a very good discussion. I need to move on to the next item so we can make sure I'm going to skip the use of electronic devices because obviously you can't present it in 1 minute and it deserves more time. We could kick that to the next meeting. Open discussion, any open discussion? Seeing none. The next meeting, let me get my notes here. The next meeting, if we're to keep on schedule, would occur, give me just a second here. It would potentially happen after the members of the committee change, so I'm going to ask Jim to coordinate the next meeting with the new membership at that time. We're just going to leave it open at this time and discuss, especially in light of what we've had today. Once again, we'll just send out a survey, and we can try to pencil in a time. Finally, public input. Anybody who has any public input? Seeing none, great meeting. Thanks for being here today. Have a great day.